Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks.
Thank you, Councillor Finlay. So, welcome. We're on air. That means those that may be listening, you can listen now. That's great to be tuned in. And thank you and welcome to everybody that's in the room. Just a reminder for those that are here for mobiles, if you have them switched off, as it does interfere with our recording. Please be seated. Thank you. I do have 3 apologies for today. The Deputy Mayor, Councillor Dakin and Councillor Walker. That's all. Yep. Any declaration of interest? I have 8.3 for myself, just so. It has been withdrawn, sorry, yeah, 8.2.
18.2.
18.2, thank you. Any other declaration of interest? Confirmation of the minutes. Somebody happy to move the minutes of the meeting held the 19th September. Thank you, Councillor Soward, and seconded Councillor Harris. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. And there's no deputations and no petitions. We do have a community report from Miss Amanda McEvil. So welcome, and you're going to tell us all about the exciting things happening in the city.
Very good. So I'm Amanda McAvoy, the Member Engagement Officer at City Prom. I'm fortunate enough to work with over 600 member businesses we've got in central Launceston and talking to them about their ideas and how they can get involved in all the things that we're doing to help promote visitation to the city. We've just finished our Winterlicious campaign, which had something for everybody. So there was a Winterlicious School Holiday Hub, we had 30 offers for consumers from our members and a comprehensive list of events. Our new Superlicious competition with 13 member cafes saw Saigon Kitchen winning, and there are still pictures on the website that will make your mouth water. 2 events drew nearly 3,000 people into the city as we celebrated a lantern walk and our successful event in Smith's Lane thanks to the support of All Goods, Beats, Brews and Barbecues. We took so many positive phone calls from members and from the public about this event, which had fire pits and food, drink and music. We have a beautiful catalogue of stories on the website too, of 10 of our unique independently owned businesses. We're now looking at putting those in a larger poster-like form in some of the vacant shop windows to inspire people to go and visit some of these individuals that tell fascinating stories. These people offer superior customer service, building community, offering great products and good use of online marketing to draw people into the city. We've got a series of 3 off-street food and drink events, which are driven by motivated businesses this spring, and they show off the beaten track corners of Launceston. On the 19th of October in Yorktown Square, we've got a community and family event with an international flavour, with our member restaurants spilling into that space with global entertainment and music. This weekend, we've got Earl's Court, which is an intimate adult event with jazz music, driven by Batu and Sanko Passioni, 2 of our very passionate members. And on October 26th, we've got Brisbane Court coming alive. We've worked with Pierre's restaurant there, who are bringing their wood-fired oven out, and we'll have acoustic music and a wine beer garden feel. And we're delighted that all the retailers in Old Brisbane Arcade and in Centreway Arcade will be open late so that people can actually see the wares and remember some of these little corners of our city. Another exciting element of our activities is placemaking, and very soon you're going to see an amazing change in Upper St John Street, which is the area between Elizabeth and York, where we're going to have a living wall, trees cladded in beautiful planters, and they're going to get some flags which are going to give them that identity of Upper St John. It's been driven by the group of businesses there. They'll be able to use that to market their part of the precinct and to draw people through our city to go and see that beautiful part of our world as well. So all the information's on our website, our Facebook page, which I encourage everybody to follow. And we've got lots of other things on there, such as the Mona Film and Music Sessions, World Food Eats, the Launceston Night Markets, plenty going on for everyone. So please keep in touch with the City Prom Communications.
Thank you, Amanda. You raced through that. Well, I think you did it well under. You did very well. No, thank you for that, and thank you for the work that you do with City Prom. Yeah, wish you well into the future. We've got a few from City Prom here, so well done. Public question time. Question from the public.
Mr Mayor, Robin Smith on behalf of Coffee Republic, Brisbane Street Business. Question about the Shopping in the City survey, which I appreciate. It has surveyed a number of people, which is council officers, business community, retail and service providers, and also shoppers. Could you tell me where the shoppers were drawn from, how they got in touch with them, and how they contributed to this survey? Perhaps their origin, demographic, and how they're canvassed?
I haven't got that information, do we? I don't think we've got that information, how they did it, but obviously Louise Grimer did that. She did that herself.
Through the, if a questionnaire were to go through the Your Voice, Your Launceston,
Oh, that went through there. Okay.
if it were to go through there, would the results go to council and then be handed on? Would they be disseminated by council if they were to go through that system?
Before they went to Louise Grimer?
Yeah.
No, they wouldn't. I don't think so. They shouldn't be, no.
Very well. Thank you. Previously, City Hearts has done a number of projects around the city. I know of the Quadrant and particularly the Civic Square that came before them all. And those projects where they rolled out, where there were cafes or planned for cafes or on-street dining, they installed fittings in the ground such as umbrellas and sockets for banners. That wasn't done in the mall. Why was that, please? Why was the mall the one?
I can't answer that. We'll have to take that on notice because I can't answer that.
Thank you.
Sorry. Yep. Get it to you. Any other questions?
I'm Rosalind Ives, 61 Connaught Crescent. My question is about the inclinator at the gorge. Recently, the inclinator at the gorge was closed over a number of days. I'm aware of the expense for the service work and the regular disruption to its operation over its lifetime. I was present at the gorge regularly to support visitors when this occurred. I would like to ask, what is Plan B? Recently I was responsible for numbers of school students, and another time there were elders who were unable to use the steps. For me, with loads of equipment to carry from the car park, it was exhausting. The car park to the inclinator, level walkway, is a wonderful access path. Would Cole Council consider either committing to a once-off payment for design modifications to the door and the operational faults of the inclinator, or would they provide more ramps where there are no alternatives to steps for access? This may be costly, but so important. I contend that it is the responsibility of Council, as sole manager and caretaker of the gorge, to be able to provide this access. I do not think it is a commercial, there should be commercial reasons why that other people may need to provide the access. I think it's at ground level that everyone needs to have that exploration and enjoy of the gorge. For me, it is a living classroom, and I believe everyone should have access to that. It's such a delight and such a unique place. So I'm looking at access as being something important.
Yep. No, thank you for that. Thank you for the question. It's a very important question, and we'll take that on notice, and we'll obviously investigate it with our staff as well to see what the issues are with the inclinator, because the inclinator was obviously for that reason to assist people to get down as well. So, yep, and we'll have to look at that and see how many times it's been off and how else we can get around it if we need a plan B. Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other questions?
Rolls Lewis, 3 Bank Terrace. I referred to the declaration of emergency, climate emergency on the 22nd of January, and I noticed that the sustainability strategy report will be on the agenda today. Is there any update on the letters to the various heads of government and members of parliament and how they replied? And is there any update on where we've got to with our baseline greenhouse gas emissions?
We've had some, but I couldn't just tell you off the top. We'll have to take that on notice and put it in our answer for the next council meeting. Thank you. Exactly who's responded and yep. Any other questions?
Thank you. My name's Andrew Bowen. I'm from 85 Elizabeth Street in Launceston. 2 weeks ago I asked a question in regard to community consultation around a major agenda item of the council. Now, I'm not particularly referring to that particular agenda item with this question, but and in light of the community negativity in the way of feedback, there's a radio station that's run a poll that said that 14% agreed with the council decision and 86% were against it. There was a member of council that mentioned that this council is very, very in tune with the community, and in light of that, I would question that, and I would just like to know what the council is going to do in regard to major capital works and major infrastructure changes and major policy changes about community consultation.
Yeah, well, we have a policy on doing it where we believe it's necessary. We will obviously have community consultation. With our capital works program, we put the budget out to the public well before it's due for approval. They all have a chance to have a look at every item that's in the public item, whether they want spent on. We get reports back and we consider that. So, and then we have another look at it, and then we finalise the budget. So I think you've got 4 to 5, probably 5 months at least of public consultation on the budget. So all our capital items are covered by that.
Excuse my ignorance, Mr Mayor, where would I find that information currently?
Online, or on our General Manager, yep.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So it's through our budget process. So obviously, we approve the budget in June each year. So it's in the months prior to that point.
April.
Yeah, the proposed budget for the forthcoming year is put out for public consultation. So that's through the Examiner newspaper, through our website, through Facebook, through all of the means that we use. So.
And may I ask what weight does public comment have on those matters?
Quite significantly. If we get especially a large number on an item, we would certainly look at that. Yeah. And we've changed our budget past years because of comments that have come back.
Cool. And what about community events such as moving dates and...
Oh, well, we've heard what you said on that, and Council would consider that if other items like that come up.
I appreciate that.
No worries, thank you. Any other questions from the public? So under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to the items in the agenda under item 8 as planning authority. So we've got 8.1. We do have a speaker for 8.1, I think. Yes? Okay. Thank you very much, Lyndon. So then every councillor's got a copy of his comments on their email. So I have 8.1 there. Councillor Dawkins, to move. Yes? You're moving with an amendment? Yes, thank you. Yep, go. No, we have to know what it is first. Oh.
Apologies. I'll move this amendment, so the change of use to planning for educational occasional care to a childcare centre, a long day care centre in this instance. But I wanted to pay particular attention to the barnyard segment of this planning application, because I think whenever animals are used in any way in our community, there needs to be some oversight. If it was an educational institution such as UTAS, there'd be an animal ethics committee, which would be entirely appropriate. So in this instance, because we can't allow for that under the planning scheme, I'd like to move the inclusion of these things, please. An animal welfare management plan. Prior to housing any animals within the proposed barnyard, an animal welfare management plan must be prepared and approved by the manager of city development. The management plan must detail 1, the species and number of animals to be kept on the site, 2, how noise, smell and waste products will be dealt with to ensure no loss of amenity to surrounding area, and 3, the methodology for compliance with all relevant animal health welfare requirements. For me, number 3 is the important one.
So you're moving that
I'm
with
moving
that amendment as it is, plus the amendment seconded by Councillor Finlay. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Dawkins?
Yes. So I'll speak to the whole DA now?
Yes,
thank you.
It's one motion now.
Yes. So the zone, the particular purpose zone 2 allows for this change of use. We've gone from worship and community activities to include childcare, a long childcare centre. We've already got childcare in this situation already. It's primarily after school and preschool, but beside that particular part of the building, there will now be a larger centre developed if this is approved today, and that will allow for 94 children to be taken care of in that long day care setting, children up to the age of 5 years old. There will be 16 staff, though it's been indicated they won't all be on premises at the same time. That's really an operational matter and not something that we need to be concerned with as long as we can house them and as long as essentially it comes down to vehicle movements, as often we find with these planning matters when there's already a lot of activity happening in one place. How are we going to allow for the extra vehicle movements? In this instance, essentially, it's the staff, the people working there, because of course our parents will be dropping their children off and then leaving. That they might be staying to have a coffee, something like that. Well, that will be up to their particular activity on the day. But I see absolutely no issue with that. And relying on performance criteria for vehicle movement and parking, there's an assessment plan being put in. None of our council officers have any issue with it, and I don't believe we should either. The plan will include 6 activity rooms, change rooms, all the amenities that are required. It's consistent with the zone, and I think as long as we can ensure that any animals kept on site are given oversight, that we should approve this plan today.
Thank you. Councillor Finlay. Question, Councillor McKenzie.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Councillor Dawkins, for your amended motions. I think it's a very valuable addition to the motion. My question centres around parking. I guess we've been to this site on a number of occasions for a number of development activities, and I suspect looking at the site itself, we're going to continue to see other additional activities take place on the site. I read in regards to this particular application where there are going to be 16 car spaces provided for staff. The reality of it is they're not providing any extra car spaces, they're actually taking it from somewhere else. So my concern is just ensuring that we have assessed the car parking requirements in the context of the whole development that's there. I note also that as things come in and things go out, and we have existing developments that may have been approved under previous planning schemes, as to how that impacts on decisions we're making now, where a lesser car parking requirement might have been required for the church, for example, under a previous planning scheme, but under the current scheme, when we change it and use the car parks for something different. So it's really just giving a little bit of, I think, public context of how that works, please.
Director Hurst. You can do it again. Mr. Town Planner, Ian. No, Richard. Who's doing?
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, look, the applicant provided a traffic report that was reviewed by other council officers as well. It is acknowledged the site has an abundance of uses. Some not still operating. I mean, I think it was 2002 that the zoning changed to include the church and how it's operating now. It is acknowledged it's a complex site. We believe that there is sufficient parking for the use and all uses to operate. They do operate at different hours, and there will be times, just like any site, where there is a potential there just won't be enough parking. It's due to that site and how the car park's laid out now. I would also note that there is, along Glendoo Street, a significant amount of parking. There are drop-off bays for this use in particular, which will be utilised. In saying that, they'll be there to be utilised, but anyone who's been on the site would probably understand that people will use the street if available. In terms of moving forward, just in the context of the site, I think the future, we would have to have some sort of discussions with the owners to understand any future developments, because, as you've said, is correct, there are multitudes of uses wanting to go in here and will continue in the future. But in this instance, I think we're happy with what's been provided in the application.
Thank you. Councillor Finlay. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Mayor. Just to highlight some points from the report, and what I'm going to say does, pardon me, cover the theme, I guess, of many of the emails I've received from those who oppose the development. when you read through the report, it's very clear that the development application complies, and where it doesn't comply and relies on performance criteria as a measure, it's consistent. So when we sit as a planning authority, as I have said verbally to people I've spoken to who've raised concerns, you know, we have to look at the development application that's in front of us under planning law. So, for instance, when you read the objections, one of the objections that's highlighted is that we have too much childcare. There's not enough. There's too many childcare centres in the city. There's no need for another childcare centre as there is an oversupply. That's not something that we assess under planning. And I think it's really, really important. And I know, and this council would know, often when things come to us, I sat around this table when the Verge Hotel came forward, and there were people who submitted and said, we don't need another hotel. When we sit under planning law, you know, that's not a consideration that we have to take into account, because I think if you flick it the other way, Mr Mayor, it'd be a pretty sad state of affairs if, as a city anywhere, where a city said, we're only allowed to have 22 hairdressers, 14 coffee shops, 15 daycare centres, whatever. So that's not a consideration. We have to assess it under the planning law that's appropriate. I come back to my initial remarks. The development complies. As I said, it's consistent in what it's trying to do. I take those who contacted me's point about the car parking. It's a big area. That area is a big area. I know it very well. It's a big area and it's a busy area, and it will continue to be a busy area. But with what I see, and I think Mr Moore touched on it in his answer to Councillor Mackenzie's question, it's not an area where everyone turns up at 8 o'clock in the morning and then everyone comes back at 5 o'clock at night. It's an area that does have peaks and troughs during the day. Obviously with childcare there are peak times. But I'd also say, Mr Mayor, as someone who has a childcare centre just up the road from me, and this one obviously just down the road if it's approved today, with the fact that people work different hours now than perhaps they did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, there are staggered times. So it's not like every car will be arriving there at the same time and picking people up at the same time. So I think that's important. And I think Mr Moore in his assessment and his answer to Councillor Mackenzie's questions covered off on that one. The other couple of things I wanted to highlight, Mr Mayor, in the in the representations, I commend Councillor Dawkins on her amendment, which we're obviously dealing with. I think that alleviates issue 4 that's highlighted there about the animals there. And I think, Mr Mayor, it's really important too to highlight sometimes when people hear things or believe things that are in DAs, sometimes there may be scope for misinterpretation. I mean, it sounds there when I read the objection, it sounds like it's domestic animal breeding, like it's a farm breeding all sorts of animals. Well, obviously that's not what it is. So I think it's really good that we've clarified that, and Councillor Dawkins' amendment, of course, has taken care of those concerns. I've touched on the parking. So, as I said, whilst obviously I appreciate the people that have contacted me for their concern, I'll conclude my remarks, Mr Mayor, by saying that obviously when people, any developer with any business, plans on spending a significant amount of money, they do research, they undertake whether there is a desire and a need for what they're doing. And it's interesting with timing, Mr Mayor, with these things. I had cause this morning to be speaking to a doctor, and we were just talking about all things you do, the weather and all sorts of things, and she was saying, as someone had just gone back to work, how she personally battled to secure a place to put her children for childcare because there's a shortage in Launceston, she said. She wasn't aware of my role, she wasn't aware of what we were dealing with here today. But there you go, that's a real life story of someone who's saying there's a shortage. And I would think, Mr Mayor, speaking logically and thinking logically, if someone's going to invest money and build a centre, they're probably doing it because there is indeed a shortage. So I'm very happy to support it, notwithstanding the concerns that have been raised, the parking one particularly, but I'm satisfied with the parking report and our assessment of that will be feasible and work properly. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. Again, following on, thank you for the response to my questions, and I guess that really leads me into my conclusion as well. Ultimately, this is a difficult issue because parking is always complex, particularly in multi-use sites. We've been to the door of hope before on previous applications, and I guess similar sorts of questions have been raised in regards to other activities that have been undertaken there. So I guess that, assuming that this is approved this afternoon, that I think that probably also making a bold assumption that there will be future commentary or future development applications that are going to come from this source, just given the nature of the building and the types of activities that are going on down there, that an overall strategic review of the parking structure is in place. And in talking to the officers this morning, they indicated that that's certainly something that the proponents are looking at doing for the overall site, which I think would be really good from a futuristic point of view, because every time a new application comes to this table, it becomes more and more complex and more difficult, because we're trying to work out that particular application in the context of all the other ones that have gone on beforehand. I also take on board the fact that we're not professional planners. That's the job that you guys are being charged to do for us. You review the applications that come in. You look at the traffic impact assessments and the commentary that are given by professional agencies, albeit that have been employed by the proponent to actually put forward the traffic impact assessments and the parking requirements. But it's our job to look at the benefits they provide in regards to those comments, and then make our own professional judgment in regards to that. Having had a couple of conversations with the officers on the bus this morning, and having asked my questions I've done, I'm now satisfied that the decisions that have been made have been based on a good process that's done in place. And I think with a future review of the parking strategies there by the church, I think that would be certainly well beneficial for us as a going forward process, and also heartened to hear that there is some additional parking that's been secured, I think, in the vicinity as well, which will actually help alleviate some of the concerns that other people have.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Dawkins, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. That is carried. We'll move on to 8.3. Councillor Finlay, you take the chair.
Agenda item 8.3, moved by Councillor Mackenzie. Seconded by Councillor Harris. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Councillor Finlay. Look, we viewed the site this morning, and if you read the narrative that the officers have put forward to us, there were a number of, I guess, issues that were raised in the representations, which were then addressed with the proponents. The proponents have now done a number of modifications to their plans to sort of take into consideration some of the issues that were raised by the representors, and to my understanding the representors are actually quite happy with the outcomes that are there. So if you look at the site, it's a 10,000 square metres, I think it is, so it's a hectare site, so it's a large site on a sloping block, and therefore anybody who's going to build is going to want to take the value of the height that's there. So it's a matter of actually making sure that that building is in compliance with the standards under the planning scheme, noting that I think that it couldn't actually completely comply with the width of the block with the setbacks from the side setbacks, because there was more than the house wouldn't have been able to build. It would be a very skinny house, I think, because there's only about 47 metres between the two sides of the block, and I think you have to have 20 metre side frontage. So I think a practical outcome has been arrived at by the planners and the proponents, and I believe it's something that we should pass today.
Thank you.
Steve Henty, CityProm. Dr Grimmer's study seeks to understand some of the place-specific drivers and barriers that central Launceston retail sector is affected by, and offers some other recommendations. On a local level, the report highlights the changing nature of retail, including technology and consumer expectation. It specifically mentions the need to be agile, responsive and embracing of new technologies. The report supports all the initiatives outlined in CityProm's strategic plan and identifies the same benefits and barriers that CityProm encountered in the formulation of that strategy, in particular the contemporisation of the Launceston retail sector, which CityProm is looking to address under its new advisory service initiative, the Bricks and Mortar series. Whilst the report didn't reflect on the initiatives in CityProm's strategic plan, it does endorse these strategies and will help narrow the focus of some of the newer and future initiatives. CityProm believes the overall recommendation of the fully integrated marketing campaign for the city should be implemented as a part of a multi-spoked initiative to build Launceston's retail reputation. On its own, marketing is not the answer, but a suite of initiatives outlined in the report and additional ones such as a formulated placemaking framework are required to achieve a strong retail brand reputation and a pedestrian-focused area that visitors will choose to linger longer, engage in more deep and impactful ways. We would like to see more in-depth analysis of the median local retail customer and would have also welcomed some assessment of Launceston's retail position in comparison to other similar-sized regional cities around Australia. In summary, the study provides independent confirmation for some new ideas to move forward with and strongly supports the existing framework of not only CityProm, but many of its partner agencies. We look forward to working with all our member businesses and continuing our strong partnerships with the multiple agencies working tirelessly in Central Launceston Precinct to ensure that this is a people-focused, vibrant and magnetic hub for people not to only shop, work, live, learn, engage, invest and enjoy. Cheers.
Thank you. Robin Smith.
Mr Mayor, councillors, Robin Smith, I work at Coffee Republic. The report is very much appreciated and I'm sure council will, I know it would have been expensive. Unfortunately, much of it focuses on typical parking, antisocial behaviour and dining in cafes and things. It is not as bad as perhaps we were possibly expecting. The survey returns were excellent. Council officers returned 80% of the surveys, businesses, organisations 31%, and businesses themselves 40% returned. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to bring in a larger range of shoppers that I would have hoped it would have done perhaps, and if it does go through just the Your Voice, Your Launceston portal, it might be a little bit stilted. The negativity index is interesting because council officers that returned only 45% negative towards the economy. Business commerce was 44%, shoppers were 50% and traders 60% negative. The recommendations are a little bit lightweight. Disguising empty shops and pop-ups and temporary things is not. But point 2C, developing a policy that sets out specific types of businesses that can lease premises in a specific area in the city, I think is very important. So, for example, a row of banks or insurance firms seem to close off a retail strip, and that is something particularly in the quadrant that we've noticed. The report itself, it opens with a statement that council had a perception that amongst some traders there was negativity. It is an excellent report. Please adopt it and make the most of it. I certainly have instantly signed up to Uber online because of this within half an hour of finishing reading it. Sadly, it does close with a statement, the closing paragraph says, if town centres are to survive, and I found that to be somewhat macabre, but thank you.
Thank you. That's all the speakers I have. Any other speakers? Move Councillor Sauer then. I assume that's why the hand's up. Second, Councillor Dawkins. Councillor Sauer, just to speak.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and I thank Mr Henty and Mr Smith for their remarks. And like them, I think Louise Grimmer has done a wonderful piece of work here. The thing, Mr Mayor, and this is going to sound flippant, but it's not, I reckon what we should do is print this report and give one to everyone in the city and compulsory reading for anyone we see. Because what it does, jokes aside, what it does is it takes people through the world we live in 2019, the retail environment, the way cities operate, the way people do business, the way people interact in cities. Because part of the challenge that we have is that people don't always understand those things, and that then leads to angst and misunderstanding and confusion and criticism at times. Pardon me, within the report in front of us today, it spells out very clearly some recommendations on page 152 and 153, and the recommendations there are obviously in black and white, but there are some key things in there, Mr Mayor, and key roles that this council has in playing its part in making our city and our CBD vibrant places. One of the things I often say around this table on various matters is that everyone needs to work together to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. The challenges that our city face aren't something that this council, the people around this table, can fix alone. They can't be things that Mr Hendy and his organisation can fix alone. They can't be Mr Smith and his diligence and interest can fix alone. It has to be something where we all play our part. And Louise Grimmer's report spells out very, very clearly the state of play and makes some strong suggestions about some ways that some things can be improved. The Examiner, Mr Mayor, ran the story about this report online, and one of the things I thought it would be really useful to do to educate myself, the gentleman who talked about community consultation isn't here now, I hope he's listening, because I thought a really good idea to read the comments on this report online on the Examiner website. And that made me come to the conclusion that I'd be mailing 2 copies of the report to many of the people who wrote on there, because it said to me, that people don't understand how cities work, what the role of council is, because there seems to be an underlying theme, and it was touched on in the report, that somehow it's council's fault that there are vacancies of shops in the city, and that councils, Mr Mayor, councils set the rents that landlords charge. Reading the Examiner website, that was a very common theme, that somehow this council is in charge of what rents people charge. I find that amazing to believe that people think that. So I'll say, hopefully lots of people are listening, that that's not the case. I think that for us going forward, I want this report to be not something that sits on a shelf and gathers dust, or I know that it won't with this council and our officers and their diligence, but the purposes of doing reports is to act on them, and this spells out very clearly in the recommendations what those are. It spells out very clearly the different roles that the business community, the City of Launceston, retail and service businesses can play. And I think, Mr Mayor, if we all play our part and do our bit and follow those recommendations, I reckon that we'll see some improvements with some of those things. The key thing, Mr Mayor, for me too, which we need to say and we need to understand, and it says this on page 153, the trading conditions are challenging for the retail sector in Launceston, as in other areas around Australia. This isn't just a one-off thing. Councillor Dawkins, I know before, had some really good data she shared with us about how many people in the Launceston postcode buy stuff online. So people, our shoppers, need to be part of the solution. So if they're going to criticise the council and say that, you know, there's 22 empty shops or 51 empty shops, and then you go back and they go, oh, I've never shopped there, I buy from them online. Mr Mayor, something else that I'll mention quickly that came out online in response to this report, there were people online calling for some big national chain stores to come to Launceston, like Big W that always gets a run. But they're the same people that say how important it is to support local small businesses. Well, that can cause a conflict. So I think it's a great report. I look forward to the findings being acted on. I look forward to us all playing our part. I commend everyone who participated in the surveys that have been mentioned. And I'll close by looking at the recommendation on 154, where it said city traders to develop an understanding of the role of retailing in the city and the positioning of the CBD in offering a specialty shopping experience not to be found in other locations outside the city centre. That's exciting. Let's all work towards that and the other recommendations and make our city, keep our city as a great city, but make our city centre vibrant once again. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you. Look, there's some really interesting elements to this report. One thing that it showed me was some elements of retail trading, current retail trading habits that have come from this academic report are exactly the things we were talking about before the City Heart project kicked off. Exactly the same things. We listened to people from different areas in society talk about it. They weren't necessarily academic, they didn't necessarily have evidence, but we knew in our guts that it was entirely true, that there's a need for an understanding of the contemporary society that we live in, but also that some of these quite piecemeal sort of measures might have actually had a big difference had we been able to implement them some years ago. Things like bringing food vans into the city, things that we've tried to do but couldn't get any real connection or engagement with. Things that I think it's quite disappointing now looking back on it, that we could have tried harder perhaps, that even there was opposition around this table to bring food vans into the mall. I think we missed a great opportunity there. We missed an opportunity to talk to property owners. Let's not call them landlords anymore. Let's call them property owners, to talk to them about what they need from the community in order to be able to rent their premises out, and what council can in fact do for them as well, because I believe there is an opportunity for us as a group to be able to speak to that commercial sector of the community and find out what it is they need to rent them, because we do hear from time to time that people are purposefully leaving their retail premises empty because it works for them on a tax basis. Now, that might be true, it might not be, but until we actually ask the question, I think it is probably innuendo and hearsay. Interesting, I think that retail vacancies are down because, of course, if you read some of the below-the-line comments, you believe that this would actually be the worst period in history. It's clearly not. Now, whether or not there's more churn through those premises, I don't know. Maybe that's it, that they're opening and closing more regularly. It feels like that could be the case, that it's happening faster and faster. People are investing their hard-earned savings. They're getting a redundancy going into business. It's not working out for them and out they go. I hope that's not true, but it could be the case. It'll be interesting to see if we can adopt the recommendation of the integrated marketing strategy, because, of course, an integrated strategy for businesses that are so different is very, very difficult. Not only are they very different businesses, but they're also competing with each other. So it does make it very hard to integrate that sort of marketing strategy, but I do believe City Prom, if anyone can do it, I believe they have the understanding, they have the historical and institutional knowledge of what is required to create that, and I believe they can do it, and I hope they get support from the entire community to do that. So it's fantastic to have this report finally. I hope we can now use it to move on. I wouldn't like us to have to go back again, because to me that would seem to be a waste of time. We need to be moving forward, understanding the contemporary community that we're now in, and moving with that time, not trying to kick back against it to a time where we can make Launceston great again. Launceston is great. We just have to understand it's a different kind of great than it was 20 years ago.
Thank you. Councillor Finlay?
It's really interesting listening to Councillor Dawkins and Councillor Sowers speak, because I'm sure any of us, having read the report and having lived here for a really long period of time, would say similar things. It's interesting that make Launceston great again, and Launceston is great. There is that play around perception versus reality, and one of the things that this report brings to us is an evidence-based, data-rich alignment to the things we've always been saying. And so actually in reading the report, there are no surprises, and there's nothing really off the page extraordinary that we wouldn't have thought of or that we aren't attempting to already implement or have talked about. And that I think is really important. It is really important to have the piece of paper that can say to people vacancy rates are okay. To say that in any environment, in any economy, there is always going to be, whether it's the churn rate is faster or not, there are always businesses emerging, testing, people trying, maybe not being successful or growing into another place. There are always precincts of, you know, that classic Elizabeth Street precinct where people perhaps try and start, or they get in at a certain level and they either sustain or they move into somewhere else. We've seen the food van grow into bricks and mortar and then, you know, do different things. So I think what this report can do is push back on some of the negative commentary. It can put some realistic information into the interplay and stop the distraction of talking about it and actually working on doing things together, which is what City Prom's called for in terms of, you know, each of us have a role to play, which is what Councillor Soward said. The report very clearly sets out what each of those roles could be. It's our time to now get to work and do that, because it is a great city. There's great things going on. It identifies that distinctiveness. What is it that we can do that draws people in to have a positive social and whether that be community or through the economy with spending in businesses experience, where they actually can reinforce what it is, both historically and in the future, can be about. We talk about regional distinctiveness, local distinctiveness, what's our retailing distinctiveness. It's always been part of who we are. It can continue to be where we move from, and simply, I think, this report actually just puts on paper what we already know. We just need to get to it.
Thank you. Councillor McKenzie.
I'll turn myself on. As a consequence of that, I think we've been focused on too much on one particular solution to things. So I think this is another good body of work. It's an independent body of work which we haven't actually contributed other than through our own sort of contribution to the report. So I think that's good. So therefore, it's got its sort of independence associated with what it's done. I was heartened to hear the comments made by CityProm in regard to things, and I think a lot of the things that are actually related in there are things that I know that CityProm have been interested in and trying to get a number of their members to actually be interested in as well. Things like understanding the internet's here and how do you actually engage in some form more online marketing type structure. So hopefully out of this, some of those sorts of things will come together. I think one of the key things that I got out of the report was the types of consumers that use different types of retail spaces. And it talked about, why people go to a Meadow Muse or somewhere like that, because they're not actually into the concept of I need choice and I need to go around in a specialty type activity. I'm going there because I need groceries and I'll grab a pair of jeans. I don't care what pair of jeans they are, I'll just grab them and go, because that's the type of shopping that goes on in those types of facilities. Whereas a city, and particularly a city like Launceston, and I was talking to people in Hobart as little as a few weeks ago, and that's considering I've been out of the country for 4 of those 6 weeks, who said that Launceston is the best place to come and shop. These are people in Hobart saying that. So the reality of it is understanding what we actually do have and promoting what we actually do have, and all of the people who are engaged in it, particularly the retailers, having a positive spin in regards to what it is that we can achieve. Now, council's roles, I believe, are to facilitate a lot of things. We actually don't do things. We have parking policies, we build malls, but I'd have to say the City Heart project was built on the greatest level of consultation I've ever seen. Now, we might say the mall in the city isn't working the way we'd like it to be. I see it still evolving. It's a space which actually still has room to do other things in. So the reality of it is the mall isn't finished. It actually gets finished when we come up with something that we end up being proud of. So I think the reality is we've got the bones of something that's good there, but what we now need to do is have the people who actually are going to come in and enjoy the space, those that are actually wanting people to come in there and enjoy the space, now to come up with positive solutions. So we come up with solutions-based thinking. So I think that what this report does is gives us another angle on various things. It gives us some more insight on shopping in the city. I expressed some disappointment in the number of surveys that, the percentage of surveys that were actually filled in. Now, I understand there are national chains and a number of other reasons why some people wouldn't have completed them, but I felt it was a bit disappointing that we didn't quite get a bit more push through in some of the surveys that were completed. But having said that, this is now a body of work. We've got some action plans that are actually identified in the report. It's now up to us collectively, not just the council, because the council actually is the overall thing, but we actually don't run the retail shops. We don't own the shops. That's somebody else. So they have to come together and say, how can we make it work for all of us? So, we can certainly listen and play the part that we need to play in it. But I guess I endorse this report, but it's only any good if we do something with it.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Soward, do you wish to close?
Thanks, Mayor. I thank the councillors who spoke for their contributions, and just to echo summing up their sentiments, the sentiments of the speakers, and obviously what I said initially is look forward to seeing the recommendations put into place. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? No, that's all. You were up. Councillor Spencer, I couldn't see your hand. Yep. That's all four. It's carried unanimously. Thank you. We now go back to 9.1, the Mayor's announcements. Just a few that I wanted to comment on, and obviously it was exciting on Friday the 20th to be part of the Launceston Revealed, that book at the Queen Victoria Museum and Art Gallery. If you haven't had a copy of that, please do. It's a great bit of history on our city with some exciting maps and showing where the city was, where it's come to, and getting us ready for where the next changes will be. And it shows you that we do go through in stages. So, and the Blooming Tasmania was a great weekend that we had. They did a fantastic job there. The City Park looked brilliant, as usual. Also, want to say Singfest was held at the Albert Hall. I'm not sure if any of the other councils got to go, but I usually get to one of the nights, and absolutely fantastic. Over 2 nights, they have 600 students from many different schools, and they actually have to limit the schools because so many schools want to be part of it now, and it's a fantastic evening. So if you've never been to one, I encourage you to get to it next year if you can. And then obviously yesterday was a pleasure to be part of the public citizenship ceremony. We're 99 new members of our community, which is absolutely fantastic, from 30 different countries. That's exciting to see that we're getting a lot of people from a lot of different countries right around the world wanting to make this their home, and it was great. And it was also important for me to go to the 170th anniversary of our chamber, and congratulations to the chamber, and Councillor Harris was there as well, and it was a good evening, and it's just to be able to recognise they've been around for 170 years. They always say the oldest chamber in Australia, I think they keep saying, so whether it's close or somewhere around there. But again, working, and obviously the last report mentions the chamber as well as City Prom, so it's good that we can have a chamber that's active in our community and working for the betterment of our city as well. And that's it from myself. Thank you. Councillor reports. Councillor Finlay.
Thanks, Mayor. While you were at the Country Club with the Premier celebrating the 170 years of the Chamber, 2 young locals were launching an 8-part YouTube online web series on the top of the Patterson Street East car park last night. The Australian, or the global premiere of the Australian Best Street Racer. Dylan and Michael, grown up in Launceston, been great mates throughout their life and always been creative and created content locally. Then we're able to evolve into making that a profession, and then, you know, nothing better than having a hobby and a passion that goes places, shining a light on Launceston, not only from the top of the Patterson Street East car park, which you can all check out on YouTube. There's a link in their channel, but they've done things recently like travelled together to Japan to document a drifter from the northwest coast in that whole, you know, Tokyo drift sort of scenario. They're doing great things and shining the spotlight on Tassie and Launceston, which is great, supported by Screen Tasmania and Screen Australia. But it's really fantastic with the rollout of our cultural strategy to see the City of Launceston be thanked for our role to make people doing their own thing easy. Councillor Deputy Mayor Gibson actually invited the boys to join us at one of the Project Control Group meetings that Hugh and Danny and myself sit on, so that we could find out about what they were doing. It allowed them to close down the streets in the middle of the night for them to, you know, film their 8-part episode and also open up the car park for them. So they were super grateful. The car, the Barina, if you don't know the story, the modified Barina will be at the Queen Victoria Museum and Art Gallery from this Friday, and the films will be showing through the month of October in the auditorium. 7, not all 8, because one of them has a high ratio of nudity in it, which is quite funny if you do get to see that one online. So with that little tease snippet, Australia's Best Street Racer, go and check it out on YouTube.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you. Yes, unfortunately I did miss that. I'll have to look it up online. Just want to report that on Sunday the 22nd of September, I volunteered as the MC at the inaugural MS Fun Run and Walk that was held here in Launceston. 371 participants raised over $22,000 at their very first attempt. It was held out at Inveresk. And just by nature, I guess, MS are an Australia-wide organisation, and 26,400 Australians are in fact affected by MS. It tends to be a bit of a slow burn in that it does take some years for the disease to really impact on you in the way that you can live your life. So that was just the only thing I want to report on. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. On the 20th Friday, I went to the Headstone project out at the Carbella. It was a pleasure to go, and the people doing the headstones are doing a great job. I fully support it, and I wonder where we'd be only for World War I veterans. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Matt. Having only arrived back in Launceston last Friday, I've had a fairly busy week this week, interestingly enough, which says there's a lot going on in our community. And like Councillor Finlay, I attended the Australian's Greatest Street Racer last night, and I have to say, it was fantastic. I mean, it's using a space that you wouldn't think about using particularly, but it was just really exciting. The vibe around there and the number of people from the public that came along and watched it was great. Unfortunately, I had to go off to Godspell before they'd actually played any of the YouTube thing. But I did YouTube it when I went home, and it is quite hilarious. If you actually sit there and do it, you can watch 8 at once. They're only about 4 or 5 minutes long each, but they're a lot of fun in there. And you can go out there and you can play the discs, Councillor Cox, from your DJing days in the back of the Barina. So it's worth going out. It's quite fun, but I now know these people that keep me awake at night, every night, as it comes up the hill to my house, the Brisbane Street Races. But yeah, it was a little bit of fun, and it was really well put together by the guys that did it. So I really sort of applaud the diversity that's going on in and around the city, and I think the cultural project is very much centre of that sort of stuff. So it's great. Like the Mayor, I was at the citizenship ceremony on Tuesday, and again, 99 people. It was amazing. And I must sort of, and I know you do this every time, is congratulate Elizabeth Clark on the role that she plays, to be able to read all of the names from all the people from different countries and I think get it pretty right. I know she practices pretty hard to get them right. She does an amazing job. But 30 different countries, and the joy that was on the faces of those people yesterday, and I had a chat to a couple of them, it was amazing. So the importance of those citizenship ceremonies and what it means to our new citizen is something very special. I also went out to a thing called Builder Time yesterday, which was out at Mowbray, and the Mayor popped out for that as well, which is really part of the ABCDE stuff for Mowbray, which Sarah McCormack, who's working out there doing that, which is actually, the concept that was actually bringing together the people who have been making comments about the assets of the Mowbray community and bringing together ideas of how they're actually going to explore and enjoy that community and actually build its capacity. So that was a really good, and that was actually held at the New Horizons Centre. And what part of the job with this is actually going around a number of the organisations in Mowbray. And I guess, like me, a number of the people that went to that yesterday had never been into the New Horizons building, probably didn't think it was a place that was appropriate for them to go and visit. And certainly Belinda was certainly saying, well, this is a place we'd love people to come in and see and enjoy it with some of the people that we've got. And the amazing space, I think we actually got an invitation today to go to the opening of the garden. Go out and look at it. It is absolutely brilliant what's been done out the back of New Horizons. But I think it was really just showing the power of the community. So there are a number of people who have contributed to the strategy that were there yesterday, and conversations about how that strategy is evolving. And as Sarah rightly minded, she said, I'm just here to sort of facilitate. The people who actually have to drive these initiatives are the people in the community. And that's what this whole ABCD thing is about. But I have to say, yesterday it was really interesting to sit there and listen to the contributions that were being made around the room in relation to the activities that are going on out there. And I'm sort of seeing, hugely successful. I think the next one they're having at AVO, the residential village for retired people out there. They're actually having it at the, Dover Street Village recreation ground, which a lot of people in Mowbray didn't even know where it was. So the kids actually decided we're going to have an event out there so that people in Mowbray can actually find out where Dover Village is, because when the word Dover Village is sort of mentioned in most people's eyes, they think about not good things. But it does run down the fourth tee of the Mowbray Golf Club. But there's a couple of other initiatives that I just threw to Sarah, which doesn't need to come from me, but just to throw out there for the community to do. But I thought that's really community in action stuff, and I think that that's something that's extremely valuable to our community. And I think that just having been to yesterday and seen how it's worked in Ravenswood and in the northern suburbs, I think this is going to be another successful project for Launceston City Council. And finally, I just wanted to just acknowledge Black Cow Restaurant for getting its first hat at the Good Food Awards, and I guess Stillwater getting, recognition and continuing to hold its hat in the Good Foods Awards. I think the Examiner reported really well on that, but I think it's really important when something is established as that is so important, particularly as we see ourselves as an eating cultural place in and around that. It's great where the recognition at a national level is for some of the people who provide the services in the city. But that'll be enough from me.
Thank you. Any other reports? No questions without notice from councillors? Councillor Harris.
Thank you. Before I ask my question, I'd just like to pay thanks to the City of Launceston Director of Development Services, Leanne Hurst, and also council staff Nick Jenkins and Amanda Craig for their success after my previous question about staff parking spots in the Meadow Mews development application, where they had to provide 50 staff parking spots in their car park. The good news is that the staff of the council have spoken to the Meadow Mews operators, and they have now agreed to provide the 50 parking spots within their current car park. That will reduce the number of cars parking in Guy Street and also the number of cars that are parking in the council-provided car park at 119 Hobart Road, which at the moment basically is full at 9 o'clock in the morning and stays that way all day. So thank you very much to the council officers for their work, and I'm sure the residents of Kings Meadows, particularly those who live close to the Meadow Mews Shopping Centre, will appreciate a little bit less traffic on their streets. But my question is, of course, to follow that, for the Director of Development Services is, how many staff parking spots were provided under the development application to build the Mowbray Marketplace Shopping Centre and the associated Target store? I don't expect the answer as such. I guess we'll take it on notice and respond in due course. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McKenzie.
Not sure how I could put this into a question, but it just what Councillor Harris said just reminded me of an email Councillor Spencer and I got yesterday in regards to a development application that had been approved some time ago, and the developer didn't seem to be doing exactly what they said they were doing under the development application, and a complaint was lodged with the council in regards to that, and the person wrote to actually say how well firstly our reception people had dealt with the matter, and secondly how our compliance officer had gone out and taken it on hand. So my question is, could you please, is it possible to thank those people for the work they've done?
You've got to be careful not using question time, Fiona.
No, I meant to say it in the last one, but I forgot.
Yeah. Any other questions without notice? Questions? No, we'll move on. 12.1. Heritage Advisory Committee report. Moved Councillor McKenzie. Seconded Councillor Harris. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor McKenzie?
Only to note that there has been a couple of new Heritage Register provisional revised registrations, which is just acknowledging 4 of our pretty important areas, which is the Cataract Gorge, Duck Reach, Launceston Railway Workshop, which actually happens to be only 3. But I just wanted to acknowledge those, which I think was a really good piece of paper, a good upgrade on those registrations. So I think it just increases the knowledge that we have in regards to those heritage sites.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Any other comment, questions? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 12.2, Northern Youth Coordinating Committee. Moved Councillor McKenzie. Seconded Councillor Finlay. Wish to speak to it, Councillor McKenzie?
No.
Councillor Finlay? Anyone wish to comment, ask questions? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 12.3, Pedestrian Bike Committee. Moved Councillor Harris. Seconded Councillor McKenzie. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris?
Just briefly, you can all read it, the interesting work of that committee was mostly on the missing link at the Inverest to actually end, which goes from the entrance to the tip and across to the aforementioned Dover Oval, where I used to play cricket, so I knew where it was, that allows people to be able to continue on that bike path. So the committee continues to look at that and try to make that happen. And also a reminder to other participants about Ride to Work Day this Wednesday week on the 16th of October, that it is perhaps the opportunity to get the bike out of the shed and ride to work. Last time I did it, I went up and down Queechy Hill 3 times in the day, so it wasn't exactly my best day, but and it was rather hot that day too. But and also to remind people, there will be an e-bike expo will be held on the 27th of October down in Royal Park. So if you're perhaps finding that the ride to work is a little difficult, an electric bike is actually a great assistance to get up and down our hills. So I'd remind people of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Mackenzie?
Yeah, I'll just speak. And again, the e-bike expo, and again, just for people's understanding, I mean, we've seen those ones that sort of almost look like they pollute more than the most motor vehicles that used to chug along the road. E-bikes aren't what they are anymore. They look like a standard road or off-road bike. And quite frankly, all they do is you actually do some work when you're riding them. So they're actually quite a good investment, particularly if you happen to live up Queechy Hill. It just might help you get home every now and then, but you can still ride along the flat on your own things. But so it's certainly something that I think is going. So I'd recommend people go along and have a look at that on the 27th, which is being held down at Royal Park, yes. And I think, again, linking back to the conversation I had in regards to the ABCDE stuff and the Dover Village conversation, that it may be a good opportunity to launch something in regards to our missing link in our bike trail out there, because it actually goes straight off the back of Dover Village there. So I'll be taking that up at the next pedestrian and bike committee meeting.
Thank you. Any other speakers? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 12.4, Tender Review Committee. Move Councillor Cox, seconded Councillor Spencer. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Cox?
Very self-explanatory.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer? Good. Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 13.1, Council Workshop Report. Move Councillor Finlay, seconded Councillor Harris. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Finlay? Councillor Harris? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. That is carried. We then move on to 18.1, Lease of Labrina Equestrian Club. Move Councillor Mackenzie, seconded Councillor Cox. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
I think only say I think it's a great outcome, and I think that it's in line with the leasing policies that we've got around the council, and I think it's great to have an area where the equestrian club can sort of carry out its activities.
Thank you, Councillor Cox.
Echo every word of Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you. Any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Spencer? No? Oh, sorry. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. That is carried. 18.2, Lease Soldiers Memorial Hall. Moved by Councillor Harris, seconded by Councillor Mackenzie. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris?
Just briefly to say that obviously we've dealt with the Tamar Valley Steiner School and their development application further along St Leonard's Road. Things haven't progressed as they have needed to, so now they need to formalise their lease, and I think the work that's been done by the council officers to produce a commercial lease has been very good for that particular hall, and I commend it all to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie. Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. That is carried. So, wait till Councillor Stosenchek comes back. 18.3. Councillor Dawkins is moved. Is there a seconder? Councillor Finlay, wish to speak to it, Councillor Dawkins?
Yeah, now I am. There we go. I wish to endorse the work of Sustainability Officer Emma Williams, supporting this sustainability strategy. If we are to keep our enviable lifestyle, we will need to embrace the challenges brought by climate disruption and lead on action. This paper outlines our position on climate action and sustainability, our way forward in curating ideas and implementing actions, and around the flexibility around this paper and its ability to adapt to new information as it comes to hand, which I actually think is extremely important because, of course, it is a movable feast. And as other jurisdictions implement actions that bring great returns as far as reducing emissions and bring sustainability to council, we should adopt them and adapt to them. And I think that former Alderman Williams, now Sustainability Officer, is well aware of that and completely across it. So this paper will enable us to head towards carbon neutrality, 100% renewables, and ongoing planning around maintaining and improving the health and safety and welfare of our community. but of course this is in two parts. So the second part is the partnership with the Climate Council in delivering in the Cities Power Partnership. The National Clean Energy Program offers climate solutions at no cost to council, giving us the resources to combat emissions, and I think that partnership is instrumental in delivering on this strategy. Since last we spoke about climate change, of course there have been huge movement around the world. Students and their supporters going out on strike all over the world in their millions. 22,000 people standing in front of Parliament House in Hobart was an extraordinary sight to see. I was very happy to be here amongst some of you in Civic Square, and it really did. It moved me in a way that many things don't, listening to young people stand up and say, you've got to listen to us, this is our future. Most of you have had a really good go at life, and how dare you take away our opportunity to have a similar kind of life. And so it is incumbent on us all, and through this strategy, to be able to make sure we have shown our community that we are listening. Some of the attacks on Greta Thunberg and on David Attenborough in the last couple of weeks have been extraordinary. And we know in that instance we have won, because they cannot attack the word or the message that those people are saying. They can only attack the people themselves. So I think that the time where climate emergency and climate change was a marginal issue is way behind us now. This is a mainstream issue. This council understands that and has adopted and adapted policy and planning around that that shows that we are listening.
Well, I didn't be saying. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously by all present. I suppose it means the same thing, doesn't it? 18.4. Councillor Finlay moved. Seconded. Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Finlay, you wish to speak to it?
Thank you, Mayor. At our most recent workshop, we had the last of a series of workshops presented to Council in terms of a response and submission to the State Government's draft Waste Action Plan. Before I actually speak to the plan and to the content of our response, I did want to really acknowledge, and we did it in the workshop last week, but acknowledge the leadership and the work, not of our own officers, but of the group regionally. There is no doubt that locally in Tasmania, we're leaders in that space. We've done some really great work and we're really ahead of the curve. And probably it's not just about Tasmania, but in terms of other regional communities like ours around Australia. And so for me, what's important in our submission is that it has been highlighted, and I love that there is some new bolding and some new formatting in the way it's presented to ensure that in supporting this, the strategy for the state, that our region doesn't actually go backwards, and the call for us to be funded going forwards to continue to lead in this space is really, really important. So I commend our response, our submission to this, and acknowledge the great work that our council officers have done and the regions group has done in bringing this forward.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. And again, having been away while I think when this was presented to workshop, I actually read it from cover to cover, which is not, and I read it with great interest. And I really do appreciate the work that the whole NWTG, I think, or whatever it is, has done in regards to the responses that the government has asked for. I think our submission is clear. I think it's direct, and the answers to the questions that they've asked, I think, are very poignant and to the point. And again, clearly from our perspective, to ensure that we don't lose our momentum, we need to make sure that they actually understand what we're actually already doing and continue to contribute to the things that we're doing. So I think it's a very well put together report, and only hope the government is listening when they receive it.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Finlay, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 19.1, the local government. Move, Councillor Finlay. Seconded. Councillor Harris. Councillor Finlay.
At the same recent workshop, we worked through the initial recommendations from our officers in regards to a response to this. And on almost all matters, we were consistent in the elected member consideration and the officer experience of what these reforms how they would impact our operations as a local government. I love the fact that we either support or not support things, and the bits that are really important to be picked up are where we cautiously support, because depending on how it's implemented or depending on how the policies created around it will depend on its implementation. However, for our council's submission, and I think what underpins any reform in local government going forward and in recent history is actually, and this is potentially a personal opinion, but I think it's supported in this submission, that they're almost all excuses for the government not taking leadership on amalgamations. And as blunt as that is to say, I think it's really important to say it is in our submission. There are many well-functioning councils in Tasmania. There are many councils that are delivering for their community really, really well and are financially, you know, it's tough, it's not easy, but they're sustainable. But there are equally many councils that struggle and therefore aren't delivering to the best of their communities, and that's unfortunate for Tasmania as a whole. So if there's any message to be sent to this, reforms are great, but ultimately we need the state to lead, because I don't think local council can lead its own change in this area. We need the state to lead for the best interests in Tasmania, amalgamations to ensure that there is sustainable and social benefits to our community delivered through what is a great level of government, of local government.
Thank you. Councillor Harris? Councillor McKenzie?
Yeah, Mayor, and again, given I wasn't there to contribute to the conversation, there are a couple of comments in here, there are a couple there that I probably personally don't agree with, but I also note that I, as an individual councillor, have the right to actually make my own representations to the local government. And I guess the one that was probably hit me first off was the mayor and deputy mayor issue, and I guess that. And this is not a personal view, not to deal with personalities, but the reality of it is, I mean, I'm happy with the popular elected mayor. The concern I have with the popular elected deputy mayor is that the person, others that stand for mayor may well be, who don't become successful, who may well be eminently qualified and as competent to take on the role as deputy mayor, don't get that opportunity. So, from my perspective, that's one of the shortcomings of the current legislative process that we go through. So, I'll just make that comment, but I'm not going to vote against it. But I just make that comment because I can.
Thank you. Any other speakers? I'll put the motion. Do you want to close?
I actually would, Mayor,
yes,
thank
Councillor
you.
Finlay.
Only because my speaking notes to this item had 2 points. The first point was the amalgamation piece, but the second point was, so in terms of the amount of time we spent on this item at workshop, for your benefit because you weren't there, was equal, in fact, maybe beyond on that item, so 7. And it was actually a really good conversation, because there were conversations about, you know, there were quite a number of options proposed in the paper, a lot that were extraordinary in their recommendation, but with 7 being landed on, the purpose of council submission was about simplicity in the voting process and therefore creating more robustness in the responses. So where people at the moment have to juggle multiple ballots and vote twice for an individual, it would remove, our recommendation would remove that, and a single ballot would be there, that the person that chooses to nominate for mayor and gets the highest response would then take that role. And we had a conversation about exactly what you raised. Sometimes people in those roles might also want that. However, in many communities, the role of mayor and deputy mayor are very different. And so a different type of person with a different type of time capacity might stand for those roles. So it was no doubt about it, Councillor McKenzie. It was well discussed. And there were various opinions, but that was the combined effort to go forward in that.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. That is carried. 19.2, the Great Regional City Challenge. Somebody happy to move that? What? Question? Can't have a question though.
I'm going to raise my hand in order that there's not stunned silence in the room.
To move it?
Yep.
Seconder? Harris, thank you.
Can I ask a question?
You can now, yes.
Through you, Mayor, I asked this question of the General Manager in workshop and it was a useful response. So if I could again. When this came to the table last time, we provided a small amount of funding in order to give the process life. And at that time, I remember conversations about, but we would like this to then evolve to be self-sufficient. And I understand in the way that it's come back, because it's asked of all councils, that there's a reasonable response to this request. Could you just outline the difference between what we said last time that we didn't think we would fund versus how this has come back to us?
Yeah, look, as I understand it, the rationale was around it not being contingent upon predominant local government funding. And the work that's been done to date has attracted around $140,000 in both cash and in-kind contribution from the public sector, or the private sector rather. And having had that success, the proposal's now been put back to local government and state government, and the federal government for that matter, to provide supporting financial contribution that would then unlock that private sector development. So effectively, I think the demonstration of the support has been achieved, and it's now back before us to consider how we wish to participate.
Yeah, that was the purpose last time, was so that the 5,000 was so that he could see whether there was interest out there, and I think this has shown that there is. So Councillor Finlay, you wish to speak to it? Oh, Councillor Spencer wish to speak? I've got to do the mover first, though.
I'm happy to
reserve your right. Councillor Harris, as seconder? Okay, thank you. Councillor Spencer?
There's only going to be $100,000 in this pool. That's, and it says 2,000 to 10,000. The $2 is a bit of a joke, I think. I don't mind if it said 5 to 10,000, but $2 it's not going to buy you a stamp. Also, you know, we've got City Prom, we've got Chamber of Commerce, and we've got these people here now. It's going to cost $40,000 to actually run it. It seems a lot of money. I don't know if we could do it a different way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I ask a question just for clarification? Because I do remember Councillor Spencer asking that question earlier today. Is the $2 correct, or is that a typo?
Yeah, and it's got $2 to 10,000. 0.7. It's supposed to be 2,000.
2,000.
Yeah. So, Councillor Finlay, you wish to speak to it?
I will. With the advocate of this process, or the person that has developed this project, has developed very successful and similar types of projects in the community in the past. And one of the things that I think in his presentation to us and is possible out of this is the bubbling up of community ideas in a way that perhaps an institution or another sort of organisation may not present or be able to facilitate. We cautiously supported things in the local government reform. I'm cautiously supporting this, and I think it could actually create really interesting community-based creative outcomes to reinforce and grow that reputation of being a great regional city. And that's something that we have espoused for some time, which was a challenge put forward by the proponent. If we keep talking about it, let's invite the community to participate to create that with us. So at this point, I'm willing to see the project go ahead. As the General Manager said, he has been able to attract, through in-kind and also some cash support from other elements in the community. Our support would be conditional on the other councils also contributing, and so that it is a team effort. We talked about that earlier with retailing environments and things. It's not the City of Launceston going alone. There's a regional recognition that we're a region and we want to grow and develop together. So I'm really interested and curious to see the outcomes of this project.
Thank you. Councillor Harris, do you wish to?
Yes, thank you. I'm happy to support this motion. As others have said, we were originally given it $5,000 and now we're asked for another 20. I do think, and I do believe that 2 of the other 5 councils have already submitted or agreed to provide.
3 of them had.
3 of them now, so I think it's fair that we drive it forward. For those of you with long memories, you may remember when Burnie was the pulp town, and when the pulp was closing, the Burnie City Council took some brave initiatives, and of those 10 that they took, I think probably 3 were considered either successful or very successful. Some were abject failures, but if you don't try, then you never achieve anything. And I think that is the lesson that we should look at for this. There will be 12 projects that will come out of this that will get funding. Not all of them will be successful, but there will be something that the unexpected that will come up that will in fact help make this a better city and help us towards the title of the greater regional city in the world. So with that, I'll sit down and commend it to the rest of the team here today.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. Again, I sort of read through this and I assumed that it must have come back to the workshop before while I was away, but obviously it did. But,
Yes, it did.
It did. Oh, okay. So I guess that, you know, I've read through it. I mean, I think probably everyone around this table knows Owen very well, and he gets out and he has a go at lots of different things. He's very good at selling stories and various things, but you know he's been great with what he's done with BOFA and a number of other initiatives in and around Launceston. I think just in the context of where I was yesterday at the builders at the ABCDE stuff and what we've been doing in our northern suburbs, because a number of these could well be attracted out of that, is that we're actually trying to build capability in communities. Some of those communities may or may not have the wherewithal to actually bring an idea to fruition because of not having the capital to do this. I'm sort of semi-hopeful that some of the things that come out of this, if we support it today, actually will reside themselves back in those areas and give them the opportunity to take it up. Because certainly with my roles that I play in the northern suburbs, including Ravenswood and so forth like that, there are a lot of people out there with lots of energy at the moment in regards to wanting to do things. So I'm hopeful that out of this, something out of those areas will evolve and bubble up to give an opportunity for them to actually do something as well, if we provide this. I think the important thing is that when this went away after our $5,000 initial support, they have now come back and effectively managed to, I think, lampoon the state government, the federal government, other councils within the area showing support. One of the things that this council has always been, I guess, conscious of is the lack of support we get from the rest of the region in regards to a lot of activities, and we seem to have always been seen to do the carry the heavy lifting. And looking at the dollars, you'd suggest we might be still doing that in this particular instance. But on a pro rata basis, looking at the actual basis of the makeup of our city and the surrounding regions, we are the bulk of the region as far as population goes. So I guess I can understand the sort of rationale, well, I can understand it's very simple, the rationale as to why we might be contributing a higher level because of the number of things in there. So a little bit, cautiously optimistic, and again, I take on board the comments that Councillor Harris said about some of these projects will go up and they'll just go up in smoke potentially. Hopefully the governance around selecting those processes through the people that are involved in this will be diligent and have a lot of rigour around it such that they won't just walk out without any sort of idea of how this might work. But I work in another environment in a philanthropic group where we don't sort of ask for people to give us pages of stuff as to what they're going to do with the money that we give them. We actually ask them for the idea, and it's about a hand up rather than a handout. And again, we judge it based on the people that we deal with, the project that they're doing, and actually getting very close to the project while it's working on. I hope that something like this is going to be wrapped around there, that the skills that Owen and his partner bring to any project is something that they've actually been doing in business for a lot of years. So I'm hopeful with their guidance, some of these projects that might otherwise not get up without some of that sort of governance around it might well be a real positive. So I'm prepared to support the motion today on the basis I think that we're not sort of going this way in everything that we're doing at the moment. We've got a community which does have a level of underperformance, and I think this is something that gives us an opportunity to see what else is out there that we might be able to support.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you, Mayor. I too will be cautiously supporting it. I didn't support the original motion, but obviously there are more players now involved, and I think I'll have to take a step back and reassess and support it on the basis that others have seen fit to, others who might be a little more engaged with this sector than myself. But for me, the reason was always engagement. How do we ensure that everybody who does have a good idea that could be a part of this is engaged in this process, or at least knows about it, because I feel like it's often the same people being tasked and asked for, whether or not it's an app that I think the last time I was involved in something that Mr Tilbury was doing, and it petered out, and it really disappointed me. There were a few people engaged to start with, then after a few months there were very few. So after I reflected on the last vote, I thought, well, okay, so he tried something and it didn't work. That doesn't mean that it shouldn't be supported in other endeavours. So now that I've read that some of the in-kind support, financial support, is given by traditional old school mainstream media as well as new media, I feel like there's a better opportunity for more people to be engaged with this project, and the fact that it is going out to be voted on, people really like that. They like to be given a voice. So I think I take my last vote back. I know I can't really do that. I cautiously support this and really hope that this time Mr Tilbury and his associates have nailed something that the community can get some benefit out of, because the last thing that I want to see again is more money, and it might be only $20,000 out of our budget, but $20,000 is a lot of money to me and a lot of money to a lot of other people, and I want to make sure that it is going to be used for the betterment of our community and not just float away again. And then in another couple of years, another council will be asked to stump up some more money. So this is a great opportunity. I hope this is the last time that we're asked to contribute.
Thank you. Councillor Soward?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to add something. I agree with a lot of what's been said, and two, I'll use the word cautiously support. Something I said in an earlier item about people being part of the solution, not part of the problem. People putting their hand up and contributing. I know, having heard at a presentation where Owen spoke last year, he, and I'm paraphrasing him, not quoting him, talked about, that there were lots of people out there with lots of good ideas. Well, this is the chance for those people to put their hands up, and bring those ideas forth. And that's really, really important, because as I said in the earlier item, it won't be the 12 people sitting around this table that will have all the answers for everything. It won't be our wonderful officers. It won't be the city proms of the chamber. It has to be, everyone has to buy in and everyone has to participate. So what an opportunity. What an opportunity for people to put their hand up and contribute to do some great things in our wonderful city. So I'm hopeful. I have a memory like Councillor Dawkins. I do remember what she's talking about there previously. What I hope doesn't happen, and I'm, as I said, I'm optimistic but cautious. I sound like a grumpy old man, optimistic but cautious. I'm a year older than I was last time I was in here. I get worried when I think that there are, we live in a society where people want others to do stuff. They want others to make things happen. This is an opportunity for people to contribute and be a part of that. I'm excited, cautiously optimistic, and look forward to seeing what Mr Tilbury and his team bring from it. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Finlay wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? That's one against, the rest are for. The motion is carried. We now close the meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance. You got my present for me? No. Oh, I thought it might have been a tie. Not that I'd wear it.
Time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks.